7:43 morning to you. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne.
You nearly didn't make it back into your chair.
I was stretching my leg. I've broken a toe.
Oh, I've forgotten you've broken
Yeah,
a toe.
I've broken a toe, and as a result, I'm holding my feet differently, and I can't get comfortable.
What did you bash your toe into?
Onto the bed.
Oh, a foot of the bed?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really painful.
But I just can't get comfortable sat down.
No.
Because I don't know what to do with my legs.
So if he gets up and wanders around a bit, let's just pretend we don't notice. Time to go through the papers now. Joining us this morning, author Nikki Hodgson and journalist Ella Whelan. And we're starting, Ella, with, in the Times, Rishi Sunak's pledge to clear asylum claims.
Yes, and the claim that it can't be done. And not just that it can't be done, but in fact that there is the potential for Rishi Sunak's pronouncements on the issue to have an effect on creating even more of a backlog. I'm sure some of GBNEWS viewers will have seen him looking slightly odd in an immigration vest doing a raid the other morning when all the Coronel Boris Johnson news broke. He was busy with officers bashing down some poor person's door, saying that he was getting on top of the backlog, but in fact his focus is on all the previous cases, and there is a suggestion in the Times and some of the other papers that means that there will be an influx of new cases, and then they won't be able to get on top of that. So it's a kind of a never-ending issue, and the Times goes into some of the detail on that. So some of the problem is that the National Audit Office found that some of the problem is the way in which caseworkers are dealing with this. So actually they found that a fifth of caseworkers who are working on cases are not fully trained, and so then aren't able to in the full extent be able to deal with those cases, and so they get left. There's also, we know that there's been an issue with cases being mishandled, simple things like filing not being done properly, and so then people get forgotten. But also just the scale of the cost of what it has cost to put people up in hotels. This is running into the kind of billions of pounds, 2.2 billion last year, most of it attributed to the money that it costs to put people up in hotels, and no bigger plan as to how to deal with this in a more sensible fashion, whether it's sort of building permanent accommodation that doesn't look or feel like a prison, something that is actually sensible and workable.
How much is all that going to cost, though?
Well,
that's the thing.
Well, that's the thing, but it's about, I think the problem with Rishi Sunak and this particular government and Suella Braverman is that they're being far too boosterish about this issue, and they keep saying, don't worry, we've got it sorted, when it's plain as day to everybody that they haven't. And the fact of being boosterish and not having a long-term plan or getting serious about the kind of law around this means that the backlog will continue to grow, but also people continue to suffer, because we know that this is causing strife in communities where people are just being planted and hotels are being filled up. There is this constant route. I know that you've covered it on GBNews before about the fact that in some deprived areas where homeless people aren't able to get a house, but then suddenly migrants are being put up in hotels, it causes tension within communities. That's not good. But also it's not good for those individuals who are illegally or whatever coming to this country to be holed up in a hotel for months and months on end, not allowed to do anything, and part of a kind of tense discussion. So it is really rather depressing.
Yeah, it is depressing. There's no two ways about it. Can we have a look? I want to get this out of the way, if you don't mind. You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
I want to get it out of the way. It's in the Telegraph. It's about C-section babies. Sunroof babies, as called.
Sunroof babies.
And how to protect them from ADHD.
Sunroof mums.
Oh,
yes,
we've
both had C-sections. So as we've discovered in the green room. Anyway, I think it's okay.
It's cesarean section babies. Yes.
Yes, mine was planned. I wanted it. It was the birth I wanted. It was fantastic. I recommend it to everyone.
Right.
So that's my opinion on it. But basically, this is to do with a study that's been done in China of a very small number of babies, 72. That's not enough. That's not enough to draw a conclusion. And apparently the C-section babies that were doused in their mother's vaginal fluids then have a lower risk of having ADHD. There's a lot...
Do they have a higher risk if compared to natural births?
Well, it doesn't go into any detail around that. So, we hear so many negative stories about C-sections and the things that babies don't develop, bacteria that don't develop basically from not going through the birth canal.
Is that right?
That's what we get told is one of the risks.
Not right, Anne.
I mean, it's one of the things we get told, old. My baby, I mean, touch some wood, but she's strong as nails. She hasn't been sick since the day she's born. She's 4 months next week. She's absolutely fine.
Good.
She had a really simple, straightforward birth, and I think that was better for everybody, personally. But what's really bizarre about this study is they don't really know what the link is. That's what they're saying.
Right.
But they think maybe that actually, if you put this flora and fauna on babies when they're born, it somehow helps with neurodivergence. I do not understand. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I'm not a scientist.
Let's face it, they're not very long in the birth canal unless it's an unbelievably awful birth.
No.
They're not very long there anyway, and the minute they're out, they're usually clean.
Yes, and your brain is developing far before that. You know, I mean, aren't neurodiverse conditions already, partly formed?
Maybe not.
Well,
Maybe not.
We just had a really amazing conversation about this in the green room with one of the lovely GBNEWS producers who works as a midwife, and she was talking about the fact that there is this trend among women to do a thing called sweeping, I think it is, where you take the stuff, let's not do it too early in the morning, and rub it on the, if you have a C-section, rub it on the child's face.
This is the fluid that's in the birth canal.
This is, they take a vaginal swab and then place that on,
the baby.
Use the word smear. It really does sound that kind of, it's that graphic, on the baby's face in order to give them the kind of whatever bacteria that they need. And actually, she was telling us that there is a large risk of some very serious infections that can take place, including strep, which can mean that your baby is on antibiotics, which is something nobody wants very early in life. But the interesting thing about this is you have to ask, why are these studies taking place? There is such a focus at the moment on, there was, 2 weeks ago or a week ago, there was breastfeeding and GCSE results. There is just this suffocating pressure at the moment on mothers to say, from the minute they are born, everything you do depends on whether they get good GCSEs or whether they get ADHD.
Right. Yeah.
And my God, is this oppressive for women? So I think it's interesting.
It is. It's another way of punishing women all the blinking time.
Why are these stories coming out?
It really is.
Well, I was going to have a croissant, but I've gone right off it.
Okay. Shall we? Well, let's move on then.
Go pick one quick.
All right. Well, I was going to go to Ella. What do you fancy doing? You've got student loans.
Let's do
Or you've got the Guardian banning gambling ads.
Let's do the Guardian, because I think this is really interesting. So the Guardian has decided to ban all of its gambling ads across all of its online content and newspapers. That goes for anything to do with scratch cards or sporting events or anything like that. And they are making the argument that essentially they're saying that it's a sort of evil industry that does harm to people, and so we're going to find our revenue from other places. Whatever, that's the Guardian's decision. But the article underneath it looks at the way in which approaches to gambling have changed. So it details about the fact that since the 2005 Gambling Act that Blair brought in, there has been more freedom within the gambling industry to be able to target people. It talks about the fact that gambling companies hone in on VIP people who gamble a lot until they get them to gamble more. And there's a lot of sort of, as you might expect, they want to make a profit, and so that they target people. The solution to problem gambling, and they sort of go into the detail of how many there is. Some people say it's 0.4% population, then some people say it moves up to more like 8% of the population, because you can't really ever know, homeless people who are off the grid, how much they gamble. But the solution here that the Guardian comes to, or at least government is now suggesting, is bans, to ban gambling. And I think it opens up an interesting question. I'm not for banning gambling. I'm also not a gambler. And I think most people of us can sympathise with problem gambling. That's a terrible thing that ruins families and ruins lives. But it's a bit like anything else with smoking or drinking or things that are bad for us. Do we need the state to come in and intervene and stop us from doing those things? Or is that an imposition on people's personal freedom? Because another way of looking at it is, if you don't have much money, and you, as my father always did, play the lottery. He always played the lottery every week. It's a way of imagining or hoping that you might get more money, or you might have a different kind of a life. And there's something kind of romantic and aspirational about that.
But it's when you see that. I remember when the lottery started, seeing people who, like in a summer field, I don't know if they exist anymore.
Yes, they do.
But people queuing up and spending 20, 30, 40 pounds on tickets every week.
And then that's why we call it a tax on the poor, isn't it? I mean, that's what it has been called. I mean, the problem for me with gambling is that its addictive quality works the same that drugs do. It works on the dopamine system in the brain, and if you are prone to addiction, then you really probably shouldn't gamble. And that's the issue. You can't see from looking at somebody who might be prone to it.
But rather like smoking, and there were these debates about that, could we not just stop any form of advertising for gambling?
Well,
yeah, because then people are going to do it anyway, right? That's what we always say, like taking drugs. So, yeah, I mean...
Whenever I see an advert for gambling, I always think that it's slightly disturbing. That
Yeah, I'm not
have gambling.
for it.
It's another to push it to people.
But people say, people say that about, people are now saying that about junk food, that they're, and the suggestion behind it is, particularly, and this is always, aimed at working class people, if I'm to be crude, working class people are such sheep that they watch adverts and then they go and do it. Or they watch adverts, they go and eat crisps. They watch adverts, they go and play.
Yeah, but adverts must work, otherwise people wouldn't pay for it.
Of course they do work, but I think we always forget the element of individual agency in all of this, which is that I think there's so much more, like Nikki said, so much more complex things going on with problem gamblers.
Not if you're prone to addiction of any sort.
Oh, well, on that note, you lot are all prone to talking, and I need to stop you in your tracks. Thank you both. We'll catch up with you a little bit later on.